Caleb Holt pressed 2 fingers against the girl's wrist and held his breath. The pulse was there, thin, threadbare, the kind that flickered like a candle in a draft. She was maybe 10 years old, curled on her side in the dry creek bed, with her knees pulled up and her dark hair matted against her face, and the wound on her leg had been wrapped in a strip of cloth that was no longer doing anyone any good. Around her stood 4 other children. Not one of them made a sound. They watched him the way animals watch a trap, not knowing yet whether it was the kind that killed you or the kind that let you go. Caleb had 40 acres of dying land, a bad knee, and no reason left in this world to take on anybody else's trouble. He looked at that girl's face for a long moment. Then he picked her up and walked home. Please subscribe to this channel if this story finds something in you. Hit that bell and stay with me until the very last word, because this one does not end the way you expect. Drop a comment right now and tell me what town you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Her name was Ada. One of the older ones told him that a boy of about 12, with sunburned arms and a jaw set so tight it looked like it might crack. His name was Emmett, and he offered that information the way a man surrenders a weapon reluctantly, watching Caleb's hands the whole time. Caleb carried Ada into the house, set her on the narrow bed near the window, and unwrapped the cloth from her leg without a word. The gash underneath was 4 inches long and angry, the skin around it hot and swollen, and the wrong color. He had seen wounds like this before. He had seen some of them survive and some of them not, and the difference most of the time had been time itself. How much had already passed? Too much had already passed here. How long? He asked without looking up. 4 days, Emmett said from the doorway. 4 days. He said it flat. He wasn't angry at the boy. He wasn't anything at that moment except focused. He went to the cabinet above the dry sink and took down the carbolic, the clean linen strips, and the small brown bottle of laudanum he hadn't touched in 2 years for reasons of his own. He sat on the edge of the bed and began to clean the wound. When the carbolic touched it, Ada's whole body went rigid and a sound came out of her throat, low and involuntary. Her eyes opened dark brown, fever bright, glassy. Caleb looked at her directly. "I know," he said. "Breathe through it." She breathed through it. He worked steadily, without rushing, the way he used to work before everything in his life changed shape. When he had done everything he could do that night, he wrapped the leg in clean linen, tied it off with 2 even knots, and pulled the worn quilt over her. Ada's eyes were already closing again, her breathing slower now but steadier. He stood up. 4 other children were standing in his main room, Emmett in the doorway. A girl of about 9 with bare feet and a watchful stillness that made her seem older. Her name, Caleb would learn, was June. A small boy called Wren who could not have been more than 6 and who stood with both hands gripping the hem of his shirt. And a girl slightly older than Wren, named Cora, who had not looked directly at anything since they walked in the door. Caleb looked at all of them. "When did you last eat?" It wasn't a question, exactly. "Yesterday," Emmett said. "We had some dried biscuit. Before that it was a while." Caleb walked to the kitchen. He took down what could be made quickly. A sack of meal, 2 strips of dried salt pork, a can of tomatoes, half a loaf of bread that was 2 days old but still good. He didn't say anything to the children. He built the fire up and he cooked, and when it was ready, he set 5 bowls on the table and said once, quietly, "Sit down." They sat, even Emmett. "Small amounts," Caleb told them. "Slow. Your stomach doesn't remember food right now, and you have to remind it careful-like." Wren looked at the bowl in front of him. He looked up at Caleb with eyes so wide and careful it was like looking at something that had been waiting a long time to be seen. "Are you going to send us away after?" Wren said. The room went completely quiet. Even the fire seemed to settle. Caleb looked at that boy for a long moment and felt something shift in his chest, deep and tectonic, the kind of shift that doesn't announce itself. He thought about a woman named Grace, who used to hum while she cooked, and about a boy named Thomas, who had his mother's eyes, and who had been in the ground in the yard behind this house for 4 winters now. He thought about how long this house had been silent. How completely and deliberately he had gotten used to the silence. "We'll talk about after, when after gets here," he said. "Right now you eat." Wren picked up his spoon. Caleb watched them eat and learned them while he watched. Emmett ate fast, the involuntary speed of a body running on empty, then caught himself and slowed, which told Caleb more about that boy's character than an hour of conversation could have. June ate carefully, mechanically, like someone who had learned to treat food as fuel rather than comfort and had no particular reason yet to feel differently. Cora kept her eyes on her bowl the entire time and her shoulders up near her ears, braced for the bowl to be taken away. Wren ate with full concentration and periodic looks toward the back room where Ada was sleeping. After Caleb had carried a thin bowl of watered-down meal to Ada and coaxed half of it into her while she drifted in and out, he came back to the main room and found the children had arranged themselves without being asked. Wren on the floor near the hearth, Cora against the far wall, June near the window where she could see outside, Emmett still standing. He would stand for another hour before he finally sat, and when he did, it meant something. "We don't take charity," Emmett said, same tone as before. Not heat, not pride, just a fact he needed placed on the table. "Didn't offer any," Caleb said. "We work for what we take. All of us. Even Wren carries water. Ada, when she's up, she cooks better than you'd think." Caleb studied him. 12 years old, maybe 13, holding himself responsible for 4 lives with the same matter-of-fact weight most men twice his age would buckle under. "Where are you from?" Caleb asked. Something moved through Emmett's face. Not grief. Something further along than grief. 3 different places, he said finally. "We came together over the last few months. Ada and Wren and Cora are from the same town, Harker's Crossing. June's people were from further east. Mine were from up by the Colorado line." He paused. "We've been moving since March." "March," Caleb repeated. It was September now. Emmett looked at him with those flat, careful eyes, reading him the way you read weather, not deciding yet whether to trust it. "Why are you doing this?" he said. Caleb was quiet for a moment. He thought about the yard out back and the 2 small wooden markers he kept painted white so they wouldn't disappear into the grass. He thought about the morning he had ridden out to check the south fence and come back to a house that had already changed into something he didn't fully recognize. He thought about how long he had been waiting for a reason to do something other than endure the days. "Because she has a pulse," he said. "And I could do something about it." Emmett was quiet. Then he nodded. Once, slowly. "Here is how this house works," Caleb said. "You earn your meals. Not because I need the labor, but because earning keeps your dignity, and your dignity is worth more than you know right now. Nobody lies to me. Nobody goes off this property alone. You come to me straight when something is wrong. And nobody," he looked at each of them in turn, "goes near the east field. Not yet." They each gave a nod. Emmett's came last. "Good," Caleb said. "Let's figure out where everybody sleeps." That night he sat on the porch steps in the dark long after the house went quiet and listened to the land. The New Mexico territory stretched out around him, moonless and indifferent, the way it had been before these children arrived, and would continue to be regardless of what happened to any of them. Inside, he could hear the small sounds of sleeping Wren's soft breathing, the creak of the floor near the window where Emmett had positioned himself like he was keeping watch, even in sleep. He had not heard those sounds in this house in 4 years. He did not let himself follow that thought all the way down. Instead, he turned his mind to what was coming, because something was coming, and he knew it the way high desert men know, storms not by seeing them, but by the feel of the air before they arrive. Harlan Cross had been wanting this land since spring. Not for the land itself, the land was half ruined by drought, but for what was underneath it. There was a silver deposit on the eastern edge of the Holt property, modest but real, and the assay report had made its way to Cross through the county land office the same week Caleb had gotten his own copy. Since then, Cross had been moving through channels, working his way toward a legal argument that would give him access to the mineral rights, which under territorial law were technically separable from surface ownership under specific hardship conditions. Caleb had been an uncomplicated obstacle. A solitary man, no debts, no vulnerabilities, sufficient knowledge of property law to block every approach Cross had tried. 5 children changed that equation. Cross would not look at 5 hungry orphan children and feel mercy. Cross would look at 5 hungry orphan children and see the pressure point he'd been waiting for, an unfit conditions complaint, a welfare intervention request, a territorial inspector on the property within a week. He would dress it in concern. Men like Cross always dressed things in concern. They had learned early that the most durable cruelty was the kind that smiled while it worked. Caleb needed Margaret Voss. Margaret ran the surveyor's office in the town of Calla, 12 miles east, and she had been the circuit land recorder's assistant for 11 years before he died. and she simply continued his work without anyone formally appointing her to it, because no one else knew what they were looking at. She would know exactly which statutes Cross could invoke, and which he couldn't. She would know who in the county could be stood in front of a hearing and trusted not to fold. He needed written documentation of the children's condition when he found them signed, witnessed, dated, establishing that their situation preceded any involvement of his. He needed Ada's wound on record. He needed Emmett. Because if this came to any kind of formal proceeding, Emmett's voice was going to matter. Calm, specific, without visible fear. He had seen enough of that boy already to believe he had it in him. Caleb looked up at the hard scattered stars and breathed. In the back room, Ada slept with her wrapped leg outside the quilt and her fever fractionally lower. He had checked it twice. He stood up, went inside, stood in the back room doorway, and listened to her breathe for a moment. Then he walked to his own room and sat on the edge of his bed in the dark, and for the first time in a long time, he thought about tomorrow with something that was not simply endurance. He was up before first light. He had not truly slept. He had lain on his back in the dark and worked through the problem methodically, the way he used to work through terrain, looking for the weak points before someone else found them. By the time the gray light came in through the east window, he was already in the kitchen with the fire built and the coffee going. The floorboard in the hall creaked. June appeared in the kitchen doorway. She was fully dressed, her dark hair braided back from her face, her expression clear and steady in the way that meant she had not slept easily either. "You're up early," he said. "So are you." She came into the kitchen without being invited and stood on the far side of the table from him. "Something kept you up," she said. "I could hear it." Caleb looked at her, thought about sending her back to bed, decided against it. June had not survived the past several months by being protected from hard information, and the worst thing he could do to someone with her kind of intelligence was treat her like she couldn't hold the weight of the truth. "There is a man named Harlan Cross," Caleb said. "He owns the Cross mining concern out of Santa Fe, and 3 claims in this county already. He's been trying to get legal access to the mineral deposit on the east edge of this land since May. I've kept him out because I know property law well enough to block him, and because he hadn't found a way to apply real pressure." June was very still. "And now he has some." 5 of them, Caleb said. Yes, she absorbed that, the way she absorbed everything without visible reaction, filing it carefully behind those watchful eyes. What does he do next? He goes to the territorial land inspector, man named Fowler. Cross and Fowler have a working arrangement that is older than my deed on this property. Fowler comes out, files a report, recommends intervention. He has done it to 2 other property owners in this county in the past 3 years. "Where are they now?" June said. "Gone," Caleb said. She looked at the cup he set in front of her. Then she looked at him. "What do you need?" "I need to ride to Cala this morning. There's a woman named Margaret Voss at the surveyor's office who knows this county's legal record better than anyone living. I need to reach her before Cross does." "How long?" "Someone in Cala already knows you're here," Caleb said. "Small places don't hold information past breakfast. Cross will know by noon. He moves fast, fast enough to seem official, slow enough to seem reasonable." June wrapped both hands around the cup. "I'll tell Emmett." "I need Emmett here," Caleb said. "I need all of you here. Nobody leaves this property while I'm gone. Not for any reason." He met her eyes. "I mean that, June. I understand," she said. "If anyone comes to this gate while I'm gone, anyone, you take the children into the back room and you stay there and you wait for me. You do not open the door. How long will you be?" 3 hours, he said. "Maybe 4. She was quiet for a moment. And then she said in a voice that was very quiet and landed harder than volume would have, "We'll be here." He believed her. Emmett was awake when Caleb came through the main room for his coat and hat. The boy was sitting against the wall beside the front window with his knees drawn up, watching the door with those flat measuring eyes. "I'm going to town," Caleb told him. "You're in charge while I'm gone." Emmett looked at him for a long moment. "Of what?" he said. "Of this house. Of keeping everyone away from the windows if anyone rides up. Of the gate." Something shifted in Emmett's face, not quite pride, but the thing adjacent to it in a boy who had been responsible for others long enough that responsibility felt more like weight than honor, and who was now being told by an adult that his judgment was trusted. He looked away. "All right," he said. Caleb rode into Cala with the sun still low and the main street thin of traffic. hitched his horse at the rail outside the land office, and pushed through the door before the dust from the street had settled. Margaret Voss was 58 years old, built like someone who had decided decades ago that sentiment was a luxury she could visit on Sundays and work around the rest of the time. She had silver hair pinned back severely and eyes that had cataloged every piece of dishonesty that had moved through this county for 30 years. She was at her desk when Caleb walked in, writing in her ledger, and she looked up at him over her reading glasses without a trace of surprise. "Heard you had visitors," she said. Caleb stopped walking. "It's not past 7 in the morning. Roy Fenner saw you carrying a child across your property yesterday evening." Margaret set her pen down. "He mentioned it to the minister at evening service. The minister told the Dawes family. The Dawes family are not a tight-lipped household." She studied him. "How many children?" "5. Her eyebrows moved slightly. "One of them has a bad leg," Caleb said. "Infected wound. 4 days old when I found her. I cleaned it out last night, and the fever has come down. But she needs a doctor. Lou Henshaw doesn't charge for children under 12, Margaret said immediately. "I'll send word to him this morning." She came around the desk. "Sit down, Caleb. Tell me everything." He told her all of it. Where he found them, their condition, how long they had been traveling, what he knew of where they came from. Margaret listened without interrupting, which was one of the two things he respected most about her. The other was that she was never wrong about the law. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Cross was in here 2 days ago." Caleb went very still. "He came in for a copy of the Eastern Parcel Survey." Margaret said it without inflection. "He did not mention you. He mentioned that he'd heard the assay report on the Holt property might require re-examination given changing land use conditions, and that he'd be interested in whether any changes in residency had affected the hardship parameters under the mineral rights statute." She said the last several words the way you'd say the name of something you found under a rock. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that land use assessments were conducted on a fixed schedule and that any re-examination would follow standard territorial procedure." "His smile," Caleb said. "I know his smile," Margaret said. She sat down across from him. "He is already moving. He moved before you knew the children existed. That is what he does. He arranges outcomes before the other party knows the game has started." She folded her hands on the desk. "Here is what you need. A written account of the children's condition and circumstances when you found them, signed, dated, witnessed, that establishes their situation predates your involvement. This protects you from a neglect argument. You need at minimum 3 people willing to attest in writing to your character and your capacity. I will be one. Lou Henshaw will be another once he examines the girl. And you need a third who carries weight in this county, someone Fowler cannot dismiss." She thought for a moment. "Reverend Aldridge. He won't involve himself in a property dispute. He involves himself in whatever he considers righteous. A man sheltering 5 orphan children from a mining company's interference is righteous enough for any sermon I've ever heard him give." She stood up. "I'll speak to him today. You go back to your property and you don't let anyone through that gate until you hear from me." He was almost to the door when her voice stopped him. "Caleb." He turned. She was looking at him with something that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite admiration, but lived somewhere between them. The expression of someone who has watched a person carry grief for a long time and is seeing them. "Set it down." "How are you?" she said. "Not about Cross. Not about the law. Just that." He put his hat on. "I'll tell you when this is finished," he said, and went out the door before she could say anything else. The ride back was 40 minutes, and he used all of it. By the time his property came in sight, he had the shape of what needed to happen next. He had Margaret moving. He had Henshaw coming. He had 48 hours, maybe less. What he did not have was any certainty about how these children would hold up if Fowler arrived with his official coat and his territorial seal and his practiced voice full of procedural concern. Fowler was not a violent man. He was more effective than a violent man. He was smooth, institutional, skilled at asking questions in a way that made the answers sound like evidence against the person giving them. He had done it to the Sandoval family over in Mora County. He had done it to old Edmund Pruitt the year before that. Both times the families had been so rattled by the official formality that they had contradicted themselves, and Cross had built his case from those contradictions. That was not going to happen here. He came through the gate, latched it behind him, and walked his horse to the barn. When he came out, Emmett was in the yard near the fence, and beside him was Wren, who was holding a bucket of water and looking extremely serious about it. "The doctor came," Emmett said. Caleb stopped. "Old man, gray bag." He looked at Ada's leg and then he looked at Caleb and said, Emmett's voice shifted slightly. He said, "You cleaned it right." He said, "Another day, and it would have been in the bone." Caleb let out a slow breath. "He left medicine," Emmett said. "He didn't charge. He said he'll come back in 3 days to check it." He wrote down Ada's name and the date, and the condition she was in when he first saw her. He paused. Why'd he write it down? Because a written record of her condition, and the date is something that matters legally, Caleb said. He crouched to Wren's level. Because Wren had been listening to all of this with the focused solemnity of a child who understands more than anyone assumes. "You all right, Wren?" Wren considered the question with great seriousness. "Ada talked this morning," he said. "She knew what day it was." "She ate a little bit." "That's good," Caleb said. Wren looked at the bucket. "June said the garden needs water," he said. "I'm doing the garden." "I can see that," Caleb said. "Good work." He found June in the kitchen, pulling together the noon meal from what little remained in the pantry, which was not much, but she had worked with it inventively, and what was on the fire smelled considerably better than the ingredients warranted. She looked up when he came in, and he read her face before she said a word. Steady. Clear. The house had held. "The doctor came," she said. He heard. "Ada has more color," June said. "The fever broke more during the morning." She turned back to the pot. She asked for Wren when she woke. "I thought that was a good sign." "It is," Caleb said. He sat down at the table. "June," he said, "I need to talk to you about what's coming, and I need you to hear it plain." She turned fully and faced him. Gave him the same thing she had given him that morning. Complete and undivided. No visible fear. Just readiness. "A man named Harlan Cross," Caleb said, "is going to send a territorial land inspector to this property. Probably within 2 days. The inspector will be polite. He will seem as if he's concerned about everyone's welfare. He is not concerned about anyone's welfare. He is looking for anything that makes this situation appear unstable, anything he can characterize as unsafe or unsuitable, so that Cross can invoke a hardship provision and gain access to the mineral deposit on the east end of this land. His real target is the silver. He will use you to get to it if he can." June was quiet for a moment. "What does he need from us?" "Inconsistency," Caleb said. "Fear. Anything that looks disorganized or illegitimate. He needs you to seem like a problem, so you need to seem like the opposite." "What does that look like?" "It looks like what you already are. Calm, specific, truthful." He held her gaze. "Can you do that in front of an official, if he asks you questions directly?" June looked at him for a long, steady moment. "Mr. Holt," she said, "I have spoken to a county sheriff, 2 circuit judges passing through, and a church mission board that wanted to split us up and send us to 3 separate towns." A pause. "I reckon I can manage one inspector." Caleb looked at this girl. 9 years old. Carrying something no 9-year-old should be carrying. Carrying it without complaint, without drama, as if she had simply decided that the weight was hers, and that was the end of the discussion. "I reckon you can," he said. Outside, Emmett had organized Wren into a second water run for the garden without being asked or told. Cora was on the porch steps with one of the 2 books from Caleb's shelf she had asked before taking it, which he noted reading in the afternoon light with her shoulders lower than they had been yesterday. Ada, from the back room, had graduated from silence to occasional murmured conversation with whoever came to sit with her, which this afternoon was Wren, who had apparently decided that his job was now to describe everything happening outside the window in real time. Caleb stood in the yard and listened to that boy's running commentary on the garden, the sky, a hawk he had spotted, the precise status of each water bucket, and felt something in the back of his throat go tight. He turned away, before anyone could see his face. The afternoon passed in work. Caleb repaired the section of fence along the north line that had been failing since July, and Emmett worked alongside him without needing to be invited, handing up wire, holding posts, keeping pace. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. But near the end of the work, while Caleb was setting the last post, Emmett said without preamble and without looking up from where he was crouching, "You're not going to let them take us." It wasn't entirely a question. It was the sound of a boy who had made a decision about what he believed and needed to say it out loud to find out if it held. Caleb drove the post, set down the hammer, and looked at Emmett straight. "No," he said. "I'm not." Emmett crouched there and said nothing. Didn't look up. "I want to say that plain," Caleb said. "Not as a promise about things I can't guarantee, but as a fact about what I intend. Whatever they bring to this property, I will stand in front of it. Every time. Do you understand me?" Emmett looked up then, just for a moment. His jaw moved once. Then he turned back to the fence and held the post steady. That evening, Margaret's boy arrived at the gate with a folded note just as the sun was going under. 3 words in Margaret's handwriting, precise as everything about her. "Fowler arrives tomorrow." Caleb folded the note, looked out at his land in the last of the light. Then he went inside. Because tomorrow was coming whether he was ready or not. And inside this house there were 5 children who needed him to be ready. He sat at the kitchen table that night until the house went quiet, and then kept sitting. Coffee gone cold in front of him. Margaret's note open beside it. He worked through every angle of what tomorrow could bring, the way he used to check terrain before riding into it. Methodically. Without sentiment, Fowler would arrive with paperwork. He always had paperwork. The paperwork would cite Territorial Mineral Rights Statute, Section 29 hardship, and land use modification provisions. The language was neutral. The application was never neutral. Cross had used those provisions against the Sandoval claim in Mora County and the Pruitt deed up north. In both cases, families had been rattled by the official weight of the process, had contradicted themselves under questioning, and Cross had used those contradictions to build his petition. Caleb was not going to let that happen to these children. At 5 in the morning, he heard the hallway creak. June appeared in the kitchen doorway, dressed, her face clear. "He's coming today," she said. Caleb looked up. Not a question. "Got word last night." He pushed the cold cup aside. "Sit down." She sat. "I'm going to tell you exactly what today looks like," he said, "and then I'm going to need you to tell me honestly whether you can do it. All right? Fowler will ask you questions in front of witnesses. He will be polite. He will sound like he's trying to help. He is listening for anything that sounds unstable, anything that looks like fear, confusion, inconsistency. He needs you to seem like a problem. I need you to seem like exactly what you are. What do I say about our parents?" "The truth," Caleb said. "Simply, without grief, in your voice, if you can help it. Because grief reads as instability to men like Fowler." He held her gaze. "Can you do that?" June looked at the table for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked back up. "My mother died of fever outside of Calla when I was 7, she said. "My father was gone before that. I have no living relations that I know of. I have been with Emmett and the others since April." She said it the way you'd say the color of the sky. Flat, clear, already factored into the shape of things. "Is that what you mean?" Caleb felt something move through him that sat somewhere between grief and something he didn't have a precise word for. "Yes," he said quietly. "That's exactly what I mean." He positioned everything before Fowler arrived. Emmett and Wren visible in the yard. Working Wren carrying water with that excessive seriousness of his. Emmett rehanging the barn door that had been stiff all week. Cora at the kitchen table with the mending basket Caleb had dug out of the cedar chest where it had sat since Grace's things were put away. June near the window with her book, calm, composed, unafraid. Ada in the back room, not because she wasn't improved, but because a visibly injured child would give Fowler a line of questioning Caleb didn't want opened. Fowler arrived at 10. Clean buggy. Territorial seal on the side panel. 1 deputy, young and uncomfortable in his formal coat. Everything assembled for effect before a word was spoken. Caleb met him at the gate. Fowler was 50, lean, with a practiced manner, the deliberate movements of a man who had learned that officiousness, performed precisely enough, was a kind of authority all its own. He stepped down from the buggy and offered his hand with a smile, calibrated to project both authority and goodwill simultaneously. "Mr. Holt." He shook with exactly the right pressure. "I appreciate your time. I'll try not to take more of it than necessary." "Come in," Caleb said. Inside, Fowler's eyes moved across the room in the practiced sweep of a man running an assessment. They paused on June. "This must be one of the children," Fowler said pleasantly. "My name is June," she said. "Sir." "June." He smiled. And how long have you been on Mr. Holt's property? 5 days, sir. He found us on the road. Ada, that's my youngest sister, had a bad cut on her leg that was going to an infection. Mr. Holt treated it the same night. Doctor Henshaw came the following morning and said what Mr. Holt had done had kept the leg. Fowler's smile held, but something behind it adjusted. He had not expected her to be this settled, and he had not expected her to open with the medical account, which preempted his most likely approach. Caleb saw the recalibration, a nearly invisible shift in posture, the way a man moves when the ground turns out different than his map suggested. I'd like to speak with the children individually, Fowler said to Caleb, if that's agreeable. Of course, Caleb said. Fowler spoke with Cora first. Cora kept her eyes down at the start, that old habit of bracing for something to be taken. But when Fowler's first question was simply where she was from, she looked up and answered him plainly. Yes, she was eating. Yes, she had a bed. When Fowler asked if she felt safe, Cora glanced once at Caleb standing near the wall. This is the first house I didn't want to leave, she said. It was not rehearsed. Caleb had not told her to say anything. It came out of her with no decoration, the way true things come out, Fowler wrote in his ledger. He spoke with Wren next. Wren was cooperative in the total and unguarded way of small children, answered every question directly, and at one point informed Fowler in some detail about the condition of the garden, which Fowler noted appeared to catch him slightly off guard. Fowler asked to walk the property. Caleb walked with him. The barn was tidy. The fence on the north line that he and Emmett had repaired the previous afternoon stood solid. Emmett crossed the yard with a toolbox, moving with the focused purpose of someone with a real job who intends to do it correctly. They were coming back across the yard toward the house when Cross's buggy came through the open gate. Caleb saw it before Fowler turned, and he felt his jaw tighten once, and then deliberately release it. Cross had not been invited. Cross being here meant Cross had someone on the road watching, which meant he had timed his arrival for the period between inspection start and finding present for the assessment, before any conclusion had been reached. He wanted to be in the room when the outcome was still shapeable. Harlan Cross stepped down from his buggy, looking like a man arriving at a social occasion he had long been looking forward to. He was 56, broad through the shoulders, with a rancher's build and a face assembled over decades into something that projected warmth and meant none of it. He moved through the yard with the easy confidence of a man who has never fully understood that ground could belong to someone else. Amos, he said, shaking Fowler's hand. Hope I'm not coming at a bad moment. Not at all, Fowler said. Caleb said nothing. He stood still and watched Cross, the way you watch something that knows it's being watched and doesn't care. Cross turned to him. Caleb. He extended his hand. Caleb did not take it. A silence passed between them that was not empty. Cross's hand stayed where it was for exactly 2 seconds. Then he withdrew it with a smile that filed the refusal away for later use. I came out of concern, Cross said to Fowler rather than to Caleb. 5 children is a significant undertaking for a man in Mr. Holt's situation. I wanted to be certain they're receiving appropriate care. The situation appears to be well managed, Fowler said, carefully. Something moved in Cross's expression. Barely visible. It was not what he had expected Fowler to say. Of course, Cross said. Though I do think we should consider whether a lone man without established family structure represents the most suitable long-term arrangement for this number of children. He looked at Caleb with something that functioned as concern and operated as threat. There are institutional resources designed for exactly these circumstances. These children are not a circumstance, Caleb said. His voice came out level, the way he intended. They have names. They have each other. They have this property, Cross smiled. Of course they do. I know what you mean, Caleb said. And I know why you're here. Another silence. Fowler looked between them with the expression of a man caught between 2 separate weathers, trying to determine which was going to be more severe. The front door opened. June walked out. Crossed the yard at a steady, deliberate pace, stopped beside Caleb, and looked at Cross with those dark, watchful eyes, calm, direct, and entirely unimpressed. Mr. Cross, she said. Cross looked at her with mild surprise. And do I know you, young lady? No, sir, June said. But I know what you do. She turned to Fowler. Sir, may I say something? Fowler looked at her. Whatever he had prepared himself for this morning, it had not been a 9-year-old girl asking to address him directly, and the surprise of it gave her exactly the room she needed. "Go ahead," he said. "My name is June Calloway," she said. "My mother died outside of Calla 2 years ago. Before she died, she lost the claim she had been working because the water access attached to it was purchased away from her by a landholding company. I was 7 years old." She paused. "That same company had done the same thing to 2 other families in this county in the same year. I didn't know the company's name then. I know it now." She looked at Fowler steadily. It was the Cross Range and Mineral Holdings Corporation. The yard went completely still. Cross's face did not change, but his eyes shifted a nearly invisible recalibration, the eyes of a man whose position has just moved beneath him and who is already running the arithmetic on what comes next. "I am not a lawyer," June said. "But I know that when a man's company has taken claims away from multiple families in this county using the same legal method, and that same man shows up to an inspection of the one person who is protecting those families' children, that is not concern." She looked directly at Cross. "That is what concern looks like when it's working for someone else." The silence in that yard lasted a full 5 seconds. Fowler looked at June. He looked at his ledger. He looked at Cross. "Harlan," he said, "I'll have my report filed by end of week. I'll be in touch." It was a dismissal. Polite. Procedural. Unmistakable. Cross recognized it. So did Caleb. Cross looked at Caleb once, one long, measuring look containing the full weight of a man who has been outmaneuvered in a setting he had arranged for himself and who is already calculating the next angle. Then he walked back to his buggy and drove out through the gate without another word. Caleb breathed for what felt like the first time in an hour. Fowler finished his notes and looked up at Caleb with an expression that was professional, guarded, but contained something underneath it, something that might have been, if not admiration, then at least recognition. "I'll need the doctor's formal assessment when it's available," he said. "And a written statement of your intentions regarding the children's long-term care, educational arrangements, that kind of thing." "You'll have both," Caleb said, "within the week." Fowler nodded. He glanced at June one more time, a brief glance, less than a second, but with enough in it to say something about who Amos Fowler was under the official coat. The kind of man who could still be surprised by a child's nerve, and found himself surprised to find that he cared. He got in his buggy and left. The deputy followed. The gate closed. Caleb stood in the yard and didn't move for a moment. Emmett had put down his tools. Cora and Wren had appeared in the doorway. Wren was standing on his toes to see over Cora's arm. "Is it done?" Wren said. Caleb looked down at him. "For today," he said. Wren thought about this with great seriousness. "Is Ada going to be all right?" he said. Caleb looked at that small boy asking his small question in the large afternoon quiet and felt something settle in his chest, not the dramatic settling of a problem resolved, but the quieter settling of a life that has found its level again after a long time of being tilted. "Yeah," Caleb said. "I think she's going to be just fine." That evening, after the meal was done and the little ones were settled, he checked on Ada one last time. She was sitting up in bed. Not all the way, but enough. Her color was better. Her eyes were clear. She looked at him when he came in the doorway and she said, "June told me what happened, did she?" Ada was quiet for a moment. "She told me what she said to that man," Ada said. "She said it with the same voice she uses when she's already decided what she thinks about something, like it was simple." Caleb looked at her. 10 years old, leg wrapped, fever broken, alive, because someone had made a decision to carry her. "It was simple," he said. Ada looked at him for a moment. "Thank you for carrying me," she said. "When you found us." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Go to sleep," he told her. "You can thank me when you're walking on it." She almost smiled. He went out to the porch and sat on the steps in the dark, and the New Mexico territory was quiet around him. The same stars as always, the same dry air, the same land that had been his and was now not his in the same way. Different, fuller. The house behind him held the sounds of 5 children sleeping, and those sounds moved through the walls the way warmth moves through walls, without drama, simply by being there. He thought about Grace humming in the kitchen. He thought about Thomas, who had his mother's eyes. And then he thought about Wren carrying his water bucket with excessive seriousness, and Ada asking for June when the fever broke, and Emmett holding a fence post, steady without being asked. and June standing in a yard in front of a man twice her age and saying what needed to be said in a voice that did not waver by one single degree. He thought about how long this house had been empty. He thought about how it wasn't empty anymore. He did not try to stop what came after that thought. He let it arrive, and he sat with it. And it was not the same thing as grief. Though grief was in it, it was something else. Something he had not felt for long enough that he had quietly stopped expecting to feel it again. He felt it now. After a while, he heard the floorboard creak inside Emmett, making his nightly circuit, checking the children, checking the windows, conducting the small vigil he had conducted every night for 7 months, and would likely conduct for some time to come. Caleb listened to the boy move through the house with that quiet, steady purpose, and something in him recognized it, not the burden of it, not the weight, but the thing underneath. The simple and absolute refusal to let anything happen to the people you have decided are yours. He understood that refusal completely. After a while, the house went still again. Caleb stayed on the steps a little longer, looking at the east field in the dark, the land that a man had tried to take from him using 5 hungry children as his argument. He thought about what that land was and what it wasn't, and what a piece of ground was actually worth when you measured it against the right things. Then he stood up and went inside and closed the door behind him, and the well had water enough for all of them, and the house was warm, and the night was quiet, and he intended to keep it that way for a good long time. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is simply refuse to walk past someone who needs them. Caleb had no obligation to those children, no law, no blood, no contract, just the quiet recognition that he could do something, and that doing nothing was its own kind of choice. The people who change our lives most are often the ones who showed up when they didn't have to, and stayed when leaving would have been easier. A small note for you: this story was created and fictionalized by AI, crafted purely to bring you a moment of warmth and entertainment, while carrying a little light worth holding on to.